show that, at least in anybody who hasn't thought about it, or any software companies out there who might be interested in it, that I believe that there is a very large gap in computer security currently. And I hope to show, at least at a high level, some of the areas that should be filled and some reasons for filling it. So that's generally the gist of my presentation. Oh, and yeah, so besides the fact that I changed topics recently, so what's in the little guide is wrong, I also don't work for the NSA. Though, you know, I work for another agent or be on behalf of another agency. So, what is computer forensics? Computer forensics is the methodology and tool set for analyzing computer systems for evidence of compromise or misuse. Methods and tools must be defensible in court, though I'll sort of segue a little bit later into sort of a growing need maybe to stay out of court sometimes, and what we need to sort of go that route and why we might want to go that route. So the problem space we have today is that without the ability to tell when our digital assets have been compromised, we have an incomplete security solution at best. Forensics tools fill a gap between what computer security should be and what it is. And we have some fairly significant environmental factors. We have a 3-digit percentage rise in computer crime per year, and this is comparable to internet growth rate. It's pretty simple to sort of think about that. Think that there's a certain relatively fixed percentage of the population that is criminal. And as a user population grows, and as computer users expand to become more of the average person, that means we're also expanding into having more of the average criminal in the computer space, and potentially some more of the exceptional and not so bright criminals. PricewaterhouseCoopers just let out a report, and I believe the number that was quoted was $1.6 trillion worldwide in loss attributed to computer crime over 1999. So significant assets have been compromised, stolen, or loss of revenue due to denial of service tax, whatever. The complexity of security exploits is increasing basically in a linear proportion to the complexity of computer security systems and computer systems themselves. And that's also another thing that's sort of a straight, linear relationship. The more lines of code, the more features, the more complexity, the easier it is to have bugs, create bugs, and not find bugs. Stealth techniques to hide evidence of system compromise are more common and easier to use today. There is an abundance of what is called rootkits, and that is once a system is compromised, tools to help mask the identity of the user that has compromised the system and mask the identity of their presence on the system. And these are prevalent, and there's some people working on some very hardcore ones for NT, so it's not just isolated to Unisys anymore. Intellectual property and information processing are cornerstones of our third wave economy. Anybody who caught the lunchtime presentation yesterday from Richard Thiem, essentially he managed to sum up in 20 minutes pretty much all the major ideas out of Alvin Toffler's third wave, which was written in 1980. Richard definitely had different themes, and he brings sort of a different human bias to the problem. But nonetheless, they're sort of both thinking down the same line that we are in a wave of change from an industrialized society to something different. And with that brings a change in what's important to our society, where money is generated, essentially what is the basis of our economics, and it changes the nature of our threat model. The ability to steal and sell small, easily movable, and high-value items, i.e. digital assets, is immensely attractive to criminals. Why bother to put myself at physical risk in harm's way? The ability to identify when I can mask myself, I can steal something, and I can move it around in a semi or completely anonymous manner, and I can broker it, and not only that, I have it and I can sell it over and over and over again. Hey, if I was a criminal, that's what I'd be doing. Law enforcement is understaffed to deal with the problem. I'll get into this a little bit more, but with their given caseload and the fact that it's much harder to tell initially that a computer crime has actually occurred. Systems are complex. It's not very clear. You see a system that may be acting funny or you raise a little bit of suspicion. That would be somewhat akin to noticing maybe your door has some chips in it that you didn't notice before. Makes you suspicious. Or something else along that lines. But it's pretty easy once you notice those chips in the door when you walk inside the house to notice that things are missing. Or not that they should be, or, God forbid, something worse has happened in your home. But in the computer world, all your files are still there for the most part, at least. At least all your assets are probably there. So are they gone? Have you had a loss? And then figuring out who did it or how they might have done it is akin to doing physical forensics. And that's a non-trivial task for law enforcement, but it's easier for them to figure out when to task forensic scientists to come in and work a scene, because it's easier to distinguish when a crime has been committed. Computer solutions vary widely, and it's you wouldn't think, and it's true, that law enforcement has a technical ability to deal with all computer systems. There's such a breadth between legacy and new technologies that they can't possibly know how to deal with every operating system, with every application, with its proprietary data formats, with all sorts of file systems and things like that. So commercial companies have little recourse if perpetrators are not found, and potentially many cases could be solved civilly instead of criminally. And that would be cases of potentially industrial espionage, internal threat. It's probably pretty persuasive if you manage to sue somebody for a very large amount of money, as it is to send them away, given current computer crime laws, for 6 months and a couple years of probation, or maybe they get a couple years at max time served. 2 years of probation. But if they become financially liable for $4 million, that might be just as significant. So, where we are today, computer security solutions are incomplete. I went over some of the numbers. And let me get into some of the law enforcement issues. Based on sort of a rough guess, back of the napkin estimate, I'd say that it takes about 20 man-hours for probably 2 people to do an initial forensics analysis. And that's just to say, has something happened here? Has there really been a crime committed? Do I have some reasonable evidence that something has happened that is out of the norm? So given that, I'd probably say we need about 208 law enforcement forensics analysts to start to investigate 2 crimes a week. How many people think that there are more than 2 computer crimes a week committed? So in Washington State, which is my former home, I think I roughly added up that there were at best about a dozen computer crime law enforcement agents. And that was between federal, state, and local. And sort of more tellingly too, the local computer crime division, which actually had 7 people in it, had doing computer forensics actually as their lowest priority, far behind things like following down fraud against elderly. And very low on that priority list, and they did that because it's significant work for them to do, and they can't possibly do it for all the cases that they have. So even if you have a fairly high asset loss, they just may not get around to it. And also, currently the forensics software that's available in the marketplace is geared towards Windows systems, it's geared towards disk-based analysis, and That's mostly in support of law enforcement's need to look for child pornography, white-collar crime, stuff on seized personal computers, not corporate, back-end assets, but individual laptops and home computers. Now, if you flip it around and look from the corporate side, incident response people who might be interested in doing forensics, are looking at trying to see if a system has been compromised and need to do that analysis. And you can't necessarily shut down a very high-value production system just because you saw one little thing that was suspicious. You really need tools that allow you to analyze the system and come to some reasonable conclusion that something bad has happened, and then be able to capture information, shut it down, analyze disk, things like that. How do we get here? Well, simply put, computer security sucks still. And we have a big gap. We have a big hole to fill. High-value digital assets are easy to compromise, and law enforcement hasn't transitioned to keep up with this threat model. Another point is that if you kind of look at the internet, it's currently a bit lawless. There's not possibly the law enforcement and resources out there to help deal with the computer crime. So essentially you have to take that homestead mentality and be able to, clean up and keep our own backyard safe. And so that segues into, what we need to actually do that. As I mentioned that, oh, by the way, my slides sort of are nonlinear and incoherent compared to what I'm going to say, so don't really pay too much attention to them. Though Windows has a large market share, there's still a huge number of corporate assets that are on non-Windows or Windows NT systems. Matter of fact, many large e-commerce sites don't run on Windows. And there's no commercial tools available for doing almost any kind of forensics analysis on Unix systems, let alone mainframes. And I have never heard of forensics tools for mainframes, so they might exist in maybe some services companies that have been targeting that. So there's a huge gap. And Dan Farmer and VT Venema have been working on something they call the Coroner's Toolkit, that is essentially a set of free Unix tools to do forensics analysis on Unix. They gave a course about a year ago that was free to about 80 people, so it was very limited attendeeship. And they haven't made the tool set freely and fully available yet, though it should be out by the end of this month. That'll be a great gap filler, but it's not a complete solution at all yet. And it surely doesn't have any support beyond what Dan and VT can do around their full-time positions. All the commercial companies have an aggregate sales total of $10 million. It's a small, tiny market because they focused on law enforcement and law enforcement's needs. And they haven't grasped what it takes for a corporate security person or incident handler, what they need to do the analysis to understand when a system's compromised. So examples of functionality like that would be the ability to get onto a system that may have suspect integrity. It may have had binaries replaced, and at worst case, it's had the kernel modified. If the kernel's modified, there's actually very little today we can do to defend against that. You're probably hosed, and you're probably playing with somebody that has a big upper hand against you. But if binaries replaced, there's things that you can do to get around that. And but the tools aren't addressing that. And secondly, you want to be able to get on and see what processes are running, be able to analyze those processes to see if they're suspicious in any way, see if they have Trojan code in them, see if they've been rootkitted. You want to be able to look at the overall state of the machine and see if there's any aspect of its operating parameters that seem out of whack. You want to be able to look at network connections and see if there's any suspicious activity. You would like to be able to capture certain aspects of memory, particularly probably process space, to see if there's, especially for suspect processes, to see if there's anything that is unexpected And so that could, again, be rootkits or be something that says it's HTTPD, but it's really a distributed denial of service tool. And that's very common at this point. And so, for instance, you do a PS and you look and go, oh, I have HTTPDs running. Well, you might see something a little suspicious, like there's a nonlinear sequence gap in process IDs. But other than that, it looks normal. But if you actually bother to look what resources it has open, it doesn't have port 80 open. It has all sorts of other ports and UDP ports open. Wonder what the hell that is. Now, currently you can do that, but there's no sort of unified, scientifically developed tools and methodologies to get you onto that box, to gather this information in a way that would be suitable for presentation in court and would allow you to do a very scientific and rigorous analysis of the state of that box and drive you to conclusions about what was done and who did it. So that's the tool gap, more or less. Sort of additionally, too, because of the lack of good forensics capabilities, a vast majority of the computer crime cases that have actually gone to court and prosecution or pleaded, many of them were because of confidential informants, other people that got busted and ratted out people that they knew, or a vast majority of the forensics was done not by law enforcement, but by individuals, though I hate to point to this case, but in the Mitnick case, it was Shimomura and some other people that actually went out and did this analysis and handed it over to law enforcement. In the case of DataStream Cowboy, it was AFWIC, the Air Force Information Warfare Center, for the most part, that did it. And if you look at almost all the cases, law enforcement had almost no hand in actually doing the initial computer evaluation. They did what they do well. They serve subpoenas. They correlate stuff. They interview people. They have confidential informants. They work all those angles. They look for those relationships. But what they don't do is they don't come to your site, grab the information that's necessary in a timely manner, and even know how to get to it in the first place. Now, there's some people in law enforcement that do know how to do these things, but they're very numbered. There's also many sources of forensics data, and as I alluded to before, that currently the systems that are out there do disk-based analysis. Well, disk-based is getting bigger and bigger, and the kinds of storage solutions are getting more varied and they're getting more complex. It is not uncommon by any stretch for internet-connected companies to have, a half or maybe a terabyte or maybe multiple terabytes of storage space connected to even potentially a single system using somewhat proprietary, high assurance, high integrity file systems, or things like Veritas or other hardware solutions. Are you just going to pop in and have your extra terabyte storage array hanging around just in case your database machine gets broken into so you can do forensic analysis? Great, even if you did, you're probably not going to complete the analysis of a terabyte of disk space in your lifetime. So that doesn't seem to work right. And you have to be able to get on that machine and look at some of the other data sources and be able to do it in a rigorous and defensible manner in order to actually come to any resolution. So I kind of posit that if commercially available computer forensics tools exist, which support collecting and analyzing forensic data in a scientific and rigorous manner, it opens multiple paths for organizations that suffer from computer security incidents. Since each organization knows its computing resources and presumably has technically competent people for those technologies, they're probably the best people currently to do any kind of analysis that are least likely to cause damage and harm and data loss because they know their assets, they know their technology. Many sources of computer evidence are highly volatile. And so if you sort of go, oh wow, I think something happened, and call law enforcement and they can't respond for a day, well, guaranteed you've lost lots of interesting information. You've probably lost the information that will lead you back to the originating people. Is if the hacker did their job, and actually I don't want to use that term, I should say if the attacker or the criminal did their job well, they've at least purged a significant amount of the data that has tied them directly to where they came from or who they might be. And your best chance of catching that is in a short time window after the incident has occurred. Now, in most cases, there is stuff left on the disk that will point you to that. Most people that break into systems these days are very sloppy. They have the same MO for the most part, and it's pretty trivial to figure out what they did and probably who they are. But in the case where somebody has targeted your system and compromised a significant asset, and has any intention to do anything with it that's going to harm your company, then you're probably dealing with somebody of a different nature. And I'm not satisfied, I don't know about you, but I'm surely not satisfied with saying, okay, well, I'm going to catch the script kiddies, and at least that's a good start. Matter of fact, I could care less about the script kiddies, and I'm personally fairly confident I can secure systems that won't be vulnerable to script kiddies. I'm worried about the people who know more than I do and are more capable than I am in a lot of ways in penetrating systems and figuring out how to get in. But what I want to have is I want to have, in a timely manner, the ability to gather all available information from the system, regardless of how they modified it, and be able to come through scientific approach and methodology to some conclusion about what happened. And this is the case in physical crime. You can be very, very, very good at what you do, but unless you clad yourself in 100% worth of neoprene, which means you have about probably 3 minutes till you die, you are most likely going to leave some DNA evidence around, or there'll be some other indication. And people are people, people know people, and you can put two and two together. But when you don't know the locality of a crime, and it's not really a physical crime of a nature, it's a lot harder to come to those conclusions. So there's a big gap. Also, sort of a final point is that, it takes a long time to prosecute stuff. Computer crime can be immensely complex. The kind of data can be very difficult to present to a jury, or it could be simple. We need to get better in making it simple and making it more concise, that we can present it to a jury of peers and have them understand the ramifications and the impact of actions that were taken that caused the loss or the crime. But there's a huge amount of computer intrusion and crime, distributed denial of service, things like that. You just solve it by suing people, And I hate to be very American about that, because we're so lawsuit happy. But there's certain times when civil versus criminal seems to make sense, and being on the side of the fence, it's a lot easier to prove your case in a civil court. There is not this, there's not completely this notion of any reasonable doubt. It's more like reasonable probability, and some lawyers may argue with me, they may not, but it's more like the case commonly in civil courts that, well, if it looks more or less like this person did it, with some reasonable positivity, but it's not 100%, the plaintiff will probably win. So why not take these people, take these kids' families? I know that sucks to say. I hate it if it happened to my mother and I was a teenager, but I'd probably learn a lesson pretty damn quick, and mom would probably rein me in a little bit more, beat my ass, excuse me, but if you slapped, hey, when I was at an e-commerce company, we suffered easy 6 figures of loss over and over again over the course of January and February 2000. Our total aggregate losses were in the millions for stupid attacks that, unfortunately, given the state of current technology and willingness of ISPs, are somewhat difficult to protect against. And the vast majority of them were launched by teenagers and other people that were just doing it for fun, ha ha. Well, it's not so fun when you get sued for at least the loss, if not more, and somebody wins. You probably spend a whole lot more time encumbered by that burden than you would the very limited sentencing that you would get even if you went to criminal court. So that was sort of a high-level argument for why the tools are wrong that exist, why law enforcement can't help you all the time, why you need to learn to help yourselves, and why software developers should be looking at solving some of these forensics problems. There's not a whole lot of people working on it out there, and there should be more. And I encourage any commercial organization that decides that they want to spread out into a new space to start looking into computer forensics, but looking at the perspective from the corporate security side, and the side where I can't just come in and pull plugs and remove machines and go put them someplace in a lab for 4 weeks till I get to it, but people who need to come up and, on the case when I was doing incident response, somebody would call and be like, I believe that we're being attacked by you. And usually I had a really strong gut feeling that it wasn't us, or they were mistaken, or they were being spoofed, whatever the case was. But I also am not going to discard any request like that unless I see very strong evidence up front in what they give me that it wasn't my system. I need to be able to go on and quickly analyze whether or not my system was suspect and whether or not it possibly could be me. I need to know that my system has integrity and it's doing the intended function. And that's the side that we need people to start looking at it. And that's the side that will bring significant revenue to whoever solves that problem well in the commercial market space. Forensics will go from a $10 million a year market up to orders of magnitude more than that if somebody comes up with the tools and the methodology, and they can teach that and sell that into the Fortune 2000 and anybody else who cares. So it's a gap. It's a gap because current computer security architectures are not good enough, no matter how good you are, to protect your system. You always have to run services if you're making money off of computers. So you can't just turn everything off. And even if you do, if you go out and use the internet, you still are at risk to malicious content and other kinds of back channel attacks that you could get. And it's just the fact. Browsing the web can be hostile thanks to Microsoft. But so we really need a way to fill that gap and cope with it, and computer forensics is it. So that was my little diatribe today. I'll take any questions from anybody. And if not, you are all free. Oh, wait, I got one. Sorry. Or two. Yes, that is a very good point. I don't know, the question was, has anybody ever successfully been sued or had a civil case as opposed to a criminal case? And I do think that there have been some instances of industrial espionage that have resulted in lawsuits. I don't know the nature of those and how computer crime oriented they were, but it's sort of a similar problem space. And surely people have used civil cases to actually open up data discovery to take action, other criminal or internally. And so that's sort of another thing AOL did once, I think, or a financial institution, to be able to discover the names of the people who leaked information. And then the other part of the question was, what about when somebody's in a foreign country? And that's a very difficult problem. But you know what? Stop wasting your time trying to find the person if you have good information that they aren't in the US. And right now, that's often very difficult to tell. And so those, again, are problems that need to be solved by these tools to help the analysts go, hey, I think this guy's elsewhere, or I think we just don't have enough good information about who this person is and where they're coming from to pursue that aspect of this investigation anymore. We should just put all our effort into tightening up these entrance points and restoring business continuity. And that's, again, just sort of a fundamental thing, is that enabling people to make these decisions more rapidly and in a better manner. Do I want to go to the court? Do I want to go to law enforcement? If I go to law enforcement, can I gather enough information that they don't have to seize my systems, they don't have to interrupt my business flow? And if it doesn't, if it looks like this is a dead-end case, then I need just to learn from it and move on. And right now, that's pretty hard for a lot of people to make the judgment. Most people just don't go anywhere with it. Shore up their systems, but that's not because they couldn't catch the person. It's because they don't know how to get the data, or the kind of data they can get is not very good, and it doesn't lead them to that conclusion. There's one more question back there. I can't hear you, I'm sorry. I'm sorry, I still can't hear you. Slides. I actually gave my presentation to Jeff. I don't know if they're in the process of printing my they'll be up at the front desk during the break. And so, yeah, that's the answer to that question. I've got one, couple more. I've got one over here. Forensics is the way to address insider threat in a lot of cases. That's somewhat simple, but I say that because the fact of where computer security and computer security architectures exist today, and that they don't allow us to reliably secure assets internally when we're also trying to provide a lot of access to our employees from a business perspective. So often we're forced to take up the model of we have some trust in our employees and we put reasonable systems in place, but when something goes wrong, we need to be able to gather the evidence to take the appropriate action. And currently that's fairly difficult to do. Or, you know, in some cases it's not so difficult to do, but as things get more difficult or as get more complex, and also as you have more technical people work inside the company that may not work in technical positions, and they may not have been vetted quite as much as your, you know, hardcore techies, the risk runs higher that people will use more technical attacks internally, and therefore you might have to have more significant analysis capabilities to figure it out. What was the start of that question? Oh, you know, like legal culpability, is that the term? Yes. I don't know. I do know that in my dealing with some of the most major ISPs, they were reluctant to do the right thing, and they gave you technical excuses that weren't entirely valid for it, predominantly because it impacted the amount of work they had to do and their profit margin. If it keeps going that way, I hope somebody sues the hell out of several unnamed ISPs. Top tier one's been around for a long time. But I don't know. I'm not good at forecasting law. I'm a techie. But it may go that route. And I think it'll go that route if we continue to not be able to identify individuals. And if you can't identify an individual, you're going to want to recoup your loss. We cannot continue to lose our digital assets and money. It just can't go on. There's going to be some solution. And if that solution at the sort of courses level could be civil action against places that housed, you know, where the attacker came from, or an intermediary system. Okay, I'm wrapping everything up. Thank you, everybody.